Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Panasonic Avionics podcast, Beyond Entertainment. I'm here with Paul Young of the Pragmatic Institute, here to talk a little bit about pragmatic marketing and the process that goes with it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
Right on. So pragmatic is a marketing process that I know that we use at Panasonic, but maybe for the edification of our listeners, our viewers, you could explain a bit about what it is.
Sure. So if you're not familiar, if it's your first time hearing about Pragmatic, Pragmatic Institute has been around for a long time, since 1993. And the entire reason we exist is to make companies more successful with regard to building the right products that resonate with their users. We do a lot of work teaching product teams how to go listen to their users, how to understand their problems, and then ultimately how to pull that all the way through to the solution that they build so that they build the right thing that resonates with their users. That's basically what we do.
That's awesome. So where does that come from? Like, what are the origins of Pragmatic?
So Pragmatic many years ago was started by a guy named Craig Stoll way back in the day. And he worked at a company before product management even existed.
Oh, wow.
As a discipline. And he noticed that they were building products that weren't working in the market over and over again. And he was sick of it. He just said, this is not working. Like, why are we building all these products that aren't resonating? And so what he did was he built the first product team within that organization with product managers. And he showed them that their job was not just to build what other people said to go build, but rather to go out and do the research, to understand the user. That was really their job.
So that's kind of like key to the pragmatic process, is understanding what the user experience is to solve whatever that market problem be that you might see. Right. So maybe we could talk about some of those key frameworks or the key ideals of Pragmatic.
Sure. So the core of what Pragmatic does with organizations, we did this with Panasonic Avionics, we've done it with many others, is this thing we call the Pragmatic Framework. And the framework is essentially just a way to think about all the activities that need to happen to bring a product to life. Starting on the left-hand side with strategic work like market research, through the middle where we actually do things like requirements and user stories and personas, all the way through the right-hand side where we launch it and bring it to market. We use that framework to help teams zero in on their job, their responsibilities, what they're doing, what they're not doing. But ultimately, it's almost like a blueprint to listen to the market and get the voice of the market so that you build things that resonate with users.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think some of that problem for a lot of us as we get so caught up in the day-to-day, I think earlier you called it firefighting, or the kind of scrum of emails and Teams messages and all of that stuff. Pretty key to be able to pull yourself out of that, I guess, as a product manager, a product marketer. How do you guys go about that? How do you teach that discipline?
So what many people don't really understand, product management is a relatively new discipline in most organizations. Most of the companies Pragmatic works with are B2B, enterprise focused, so business to business. And you take a role like sales, has been around for thousands of years. Marketing, hundreds. Project management, decades. Product management, really only the last 20, 30 years. And so it's not really well understood in many organizations. And so what ends up happening is, because of this lack of understanding of like what is a product manager, what ends up happening is that the product manager gets given all this other work. So if we don't have enough people in sales, the product manager gets pulled in to do a demo. If we don't have enough project managers, they start doing that. The same thing with QA, design, all these other things. And pretty soon the product manager looks up and all they're doing every day is putting out fires.
Right.
I call it the chief firefighter.
They've become sort of like a generalist for kind of all of that work.
That's exactly right. And when they're doing all this other stuff, who is listening to the market? Like, who's deciding out of everything we could do, what should we do, and really understanding the user and the user's problems? The answer is nobody in most companies. And so what ends up happening at that point is that companies become very, what I call inside out in their focus. Their focus turns inward to the voices inside the four walls of their organization. And the danger with an inside out focus is that inside out companies build inside out products as a result. And you can think of an inside out product as a product that we built not because we should, but because we could.
Okay.
And you're going to know you have an inside out product when people say things like, well, who wouldn't want one of these? Or wouldn't it be a great idea if we had one of these? And then you build it and you launch it and it doesn't resonate in the market. There's a million examples of inside out products in the world. Some of them do well, most of them fail. But the thing about inside out, it's risky. If you just come up with ideas, you build them, there's a good chance they're going to fail.
Yeah, I have a digital marketing background, and I kind of call it like the shiny marketing thing syndrome, where there's like that new tool out there that you're like, oh, I got to go get on board that. Like now, without really thinking through how are we going to use it, how are we going to implement it? Is it even going to have a benefit for us? Right. So that fast pivot to the thing maybe isn't even what you need. That loud call from the inside maybe isn't actually addressing the market problem that you wanted to address.
Exactly right.
So you have a term that I had never heard until I learned a little bit about Pragmatic, NIHITO. What does that stand for?
So NIHITO stands for Nothing Important Happens in the Office. NIHITO. And
I don't know if my boss would agree.
Right, exactly. That's the whole point, right? If you look at product managers, they get this gravitational pull back to the office.
Right.
And nowadays you could call it NIHITOT, nothing important happens on Teams, or NIHITAS, nothing important happens on Zoom. But like, you get the idea. When we're in internal meetings, regardless of where they physically are, we're talking to each other. We're not talking to the market out there. And we would argue that if the goal is to be market driven, if the goal is to really represent the needs of our users, then you can't talk to other people inside of your company, because at best, the research you're going to get at that point is second or third hand.
Sure.
Right? You got to get it firsthand, which means you have to go out into the market and experience those users, those buyers, their problems firsthand. I talked about inside out earlier and like what inside out is. The antidote to inside out is where you flip it around. We call it outside in. And the idea with outside in is you do your NIHITO, you go out into the market, the product team does. They they observe buyers and users. They understand their problems. During the prep for this session, one of the examples that I brought up was a company that Pragmatic worked with. They were in the medical space here in the US. And I think anybody in the US has had this experience where you go to the doctor's office and they hand you what I call the clipboard.
Absolutely.
And like, everyone knows what I mean when I say the clipboard. It's like, here's some forms that we'd like you to fill out.
Yeah. You filled them out online before you got there. You filled them out last time you were there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like at least 3 times before that, you've given this exact same information about your insurance, about your kids, about your pre-existing kids, like all that stuff. They know that already.
Yeah.
But they want their copy. So for whatever reason, you have to go fill it out again. And this company that we were working with was trying to figure out, like, how do we fix that problem? And so one of the things they did was they went out into doctors' offices with permission, of course, and they sat down and they observed people taking the clipboard, filling it out. It's not until you see the frustration on somebody's face when you actually are talking to them in that setting that you can understand, oh, I just gave this information last time. You can't understand how frustrated I am. I'm going to go to this other place next time because I don't like doing this. So those are the kinds of things that you get from the direct contact with the market. So if you ever hear us referring to a NIHITO visit, that's what we mean.
That's out in the world, observing what's happening to figure out what that problem actually is. And
exactly. It's field-based observational research. So like in the IFE space, getting on an airplane and watching somebody click on the screen and getting frustrated when it doesn't work the way they want, or maybe it does work. But there's all different kinds of users in that environment. Like, we can't just say our audience or our target user is the passenger. I mean, there's the business traveler like me. I'm pretty tech savvy, but there's also like the elderly traveler with arthritis and cataracts. There's the flight attendant who's a user in a different way, and so on. And so like, there's all these different users, and we have to understand they all have different problems that we're solving. They all have different needs. So we can't just build for one of them. Most people tend to think about themselves when they build a solution.
It's the experience we have.
Yeah, because we're relating to our own experience. Exactly. And so you have to get out from your own experience and look through the eyes of the user. Sometimes I refer to that NIHITO process like a pair of virtual reality goggles that you're using to like look through the eyes of the user. And it's not until you look through the user's eyes, their eyes, and appreciate things from their perspective, can you then really focus on their problems and what matters to them.
Absolutely. So we use Pragmatic. You just mentioned the medical device, or the medical office company that you had an example from. How many companies out there have kind of adopted this process? I think I read just before we started that it has like quickly become like the gold standard of product management instruction or learning. So how many companies do we think are out there who have implemented this?
So there was a company that I worked with many years ago. Some of you might remember it. It's a company called BASF, and they have a really great tagline, or they used to. They said, "We don't make a lot of the products you buy. We make a lot of the products you buy better." And that's kind of how I think about Pragmatic. Like, we don't make a lot of the products you buy, but we certainly make them better by helping the teams that are building them understand how to make that connection with their users. Pragmatic at this point has trained over 15,000 companies around the world in this technique, this framework, and so on. And we have a alumni base of over 250,000 people that have gone through the program. And so they're all over. Every company, every industry you could conceive of, ranging from business to consumer all the way up to business. Obviously, avionics, but also B2B enterprise software, massive companies, startups, everything in between. Basically, anybody who wants to make a product that's going to succeed because they want to make that connection with their user, that's who we work with.
Right. That absolutely makes sense. So you're here in Southern California, visiting us, obviously, for this podcast, but I imagine you're also here visiting a client or two. Is there anything that you can share from recent visits that were maybe unique about the way that you've used Pragmatic, or some insights there?
Yeah. So I was with a client just yesterday, actually. Really interesting client. Obviously, they wouldn't want me using their name, but I will tell you kind of a little bit about their space. They're in the geospatial information systems market. And pretty much any time you pull up a map, you're looking at their data.
Nice.
So it's pretty cool. They're in thousands of different products all over the world with their data. And they sell to governments for like national security and other purposes. They sell to state and local. They sell to military. They sell to like industry. Pretty much everybody uses their stuff. But one really interesting application of their work was with local governments like counties. Here in the US, at least in Texas where I live, the counties do a lot of planning around things like floods. And I know that's been a big topic here in Southern California as well. And so every 100 years, you might get that 100-year flood, where things come through, and it could be a big disaster if you haven't planned for it correctly. And they use this company's software, the county engineer does, to plan for those events. And one of the really cool things that it can do is it can actually simulate what would happen if you were to build a road here. How would that change the flood pattern and so on? And what they did is they did the NIHITO process that we taught them. They actually went out into the county engineer's office. Like, for example, in Williamson County, Texas, where I live near Austin, they would go out and they would watch the county engineers go through their planning process to really understand in the software that they were using what was working and also what was not working.
Right.
And what they identified was that there was a process in this planning that would take 17 steps. Really should have only taken 2 or 3. And through that learning, they were able to dramatically simplify their software, almost build like what you could call like the easy button that you could push, and it would just do everything. It was almost like magic. And when they rolled it out, the county engineers said, "This is amazing," and it has freed up hours of their time to do other high value work. And so it's just one cool example of how clients that we work with are applying what we teach them.
Yeah, building a better mousetrap, right?
That's
right. That's
right.
the saying.
Or maybe just building a mousetrap for the first time that you never thought of.
Sure. So if I'm a company sitting out there, I've heard a little bit about Pragmatic. I look at my product team and I say, hey, maybe this is for me. What are some of the maybe first steps that I could go get after?
Sure.
Obviously, like NIHITO is one of them. You just go sit where your customers might be, but maybe in like more formally.
Well, I mean, there's stuff that you could do on your own. You could just educate yourself. If you go to pragmaticinstitute.com, you can read a lot of stuff that we have published for free. As a great starting point, including teaching people a little bit about the NIHITO process and how to do it. And you don't need our permission or anybody's permission to go and talk to your users.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so maybe start there if you haven't done that yet. Set up a formal process. I would actually enforce a quota on my product team for the number of NIHITO visits that I would expect them to do every quarter. And typically the quota I put on them was 10. So if you're a product manager on my team, 10 times a quarter, which is about once a week, you got to get out there, you got to talk to people in your market, which I think is kind of reasonable, right? If you're not talking to your market weekly, how are you making decisions?
Right.
Probably inside out. And so you could put something like that in place. Of course, we'd love to see you in a pragmatic training. Not here to sell that, but it's always an option.
PragmaticInstitute.com.
Exactly. Like click on this URL right here. Make sure you
link in the description below.
Yeah, smash that like and subscribe button. But anyways, all that stuff is available as resources for you. But again, you don't need anyone's permission. This is not rocket surgery, right? It's something that everybody can do. It just takes a little bit of effort.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned like the easy process of, or the low-hanging fruit of just like being out there and observing your customers. It made me think of something that I've noticed at like Disneyland. So Disneyland, if you're walking around the parks, you'll see every once in a while, you'll see somebody from like the corporate office, and they're pretty clearly labeled as corporate cast members. But they're there, I think, generally just like walking around the park and like picking up trash and that kind of thing. But probably what they're doing is they're experiencing the park and they're watching their customers and they're seeing how people flow through and explore and all of that stuff.
They are.
So they're just embracing that.
Yeah.
NIHITO.
Well, and imagine the opposite. Pragmatic. Imagine for a second the opposite effect, where if Disney in this case was like every other company, and those people were just sitting behind a desk in an office building somewhere.
Sure.
Making ideas up.
Right.
I mean, certainly a few of them are going to hit, but many of them are not, to understand the problems our users have. There's another really great one called win-loss analysis, which is answering the question, why are we winning and why are we losing? Every product manager, every product team, every company should know the answer to why we're winning and losing.
Right.
But I'm guessing today, most people listening to this think they know why they're winning and losing, but they don't really. And just as a quick example of this, most teams, when they're trying to figure out why they're winning and losing, they go talk to sales.
Right.
And they say, hey, sales, why are we losing the deal? So here's why I say they don't really know. So if you go to sales right now, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
But if you go to sales and say, hey, sales, we are super bummed out and sad because we just lost this big deal. Why did we lose? Typically, I'm going to hear a couple of reasons from sales why we lost. Can you think of any of what they might be?
My gut says that the sales team is going to look at the competitor that won and say, we didn't have XYZ thing that the competitor had.
So a feature deficiency.
Right.
Right. So the product.
Or price.
Yeah. Always the top two. Always. So price or product are always the number 1 and 2 reasons cited by sales as to why we lost. On the other hand, if you go to sales and say, hey, sales, great job landing that big deal. Why'd we win?
Oh, interesting.
What do we think is the reason now about why we won?
Because they were such a good salesperson.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. Because of my amazing ability to close, like I was able to overcome your dog of a product.
Because we closed.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, they might not say it like that, but they're thinking that.
Absolutely.
So the nuance here is there's a million reasons why we might win or lose deals that go way beyond price or feature or relationship. So we need a neutral third party who isn't like close to the deal, like a salesperson, to go in and actually do kind of a version of the NIHITO process we talked about with a recent buyer to find out why did we actually win and lose. And you might find out it is price or feature, but you're probably going to find out it's something else.
Sure.
As a really quick example, and cut me off if I'm going too deep here,
but no worries.
A really quick example, I worked with a client once who they were convinced that the reason they were losing was price. And so in the B2B space, you hear this all the time. We lose on price. And the sales team was pressuring for discounts.
Right.
Like we want a discount. And that was like their opening move. And the product team came in after they worked with us and they were like, well, Paul, Pragmatic, they're saying maybe it's not price. Let's do some win-loss and find out why we're actually winning. And what they did was they went out and interviewed their top 10 most recent wins. So like the last wins that we got, top 10. And what they found out when they asked them, why did you choose us? They expected the answer to be, we chose you because you were the lowest price.
Right. You were the cheapest
which is what you would hear if you're actually winning on price. But what they heard instead was that we chose you because you have the best reputation in the industry for service and support.
Interesting.
And so now, whenever the conversation comes up with sales about, hey, we should discount. Wait a second. We actually have data now that suggests why we're winning is not price. It's this other thing. Go sell on that.
Yeah.
And it makes it a much more data-driven conversation instead of anecdotal and emotional, which is like, I'm all about the data.
Yeah, absolutely. and you arm the sales team with more outs than just giving up money, right?
Yeah.
Or more options than just giving up on price.
Sales, I mean, I'm not here to bash sales. I've done sales. It's hard. And everybody should do it at some point. Sales, if they don't know how to fight to win a deal, is going to reach for the weapon they know how to use and is easy to use, which is discount, right? I can throw a 50% discount on the deal. But the problem with discounting is that it's not sustainable. Like if we hang our hat on discounting, eventually somebody else is going to show up who's willing to discount more.
Right. Now
we're in big trouble. So like, what do we do? So market problems, research, win-loss analysis, research, those two. The third and fourth ones that I see the light bulbs going on are the buyer-user persona. And persona is kind of a technical word in our industry. If you're not familiar with a persona is literally a personification of an average or typical buyer or user. And instead of just talking about the user or the buyer with air quotes in like a generic way, it allows us to humanize the buyer and user by outlining their typical characteristics, what they care about, and so on. To take our example of the passenger in an IFE environment, you might have the business traveler like you or me. You might have the family with children as a different persona. You might have the elderly traveler, the flight attendant. You might have like 4, 5, 6 different personas. And for this next version of our product, which one of those are we going to focus on? Like you might choose not to focus on one of them, and that's okay if you know that. But where you get big problems in development is where, you think we're focusing on this persona and I think we're focusing on this other one. And pretty soon we're building a product that is
for no one,
for nobody.
Yeah.
Right. So personas is really powerful to kind of close that gap. I love personas. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight is innovation. Because everybody talks about being innovative. What does that actually mean? For me and for Pragmatic, being innovative is solving problems that people actually care about.
Right.
And so I almost describe it like a golden thread, if you could imagine a golden thread like from the fairy tales, that we weave through the entire process. It starts with the market research, and then that golden thread gets woven through the roadmap. It gets woven through our strategy. Eventually, it gets woven through the problems we decide to go solve, the business case that we build, the product that we go and execute and eventually launch.
Yeah.
And it's almost like pulling that thread all the way from originally finding the problem all the way through solving it without it ever breaking. And that is where the innovation shows up. When people say, oh my gosh, this solution that you gave me perfectly solves a problem that I have. It's almost like you were sitting on my shoulder, watching me go through my day and experience this problem. And it's almost like you read my mind. Like that's the kind of a reaction you want to get from users when you have nailed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to come visit us today. Do you want to give maybe a little shout out where people can find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So pragmaticinstitute.com, or if you just search for Pragmatic Product Management, Pragmatic Product Marketing Training, you'll find us. We have our full schedule on there, so you can go and sign up for one of our trainings. We do them both online and in person. We also do workshops where it's very hands-on. You can get on with like AI, you can learn about positioning, and you can actually do it. And we have coaching as well. So if you need coaching, if you need help, if you want to like have somebody who's not just your fishing guide, but they're in the boat with you, we can help you there as well. So we'd love to work with you. Give us a call.
Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button. And we'll see you on the next episode of Beyond Entertainment with Panasonic Avionics. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.